After 5 years of working at Bridge Costco, I still wasn't sure if I loved the place or if it was slowly killing me. On some days, it felt like family, free pizza samples, co-workers who stepped in to give you an extra 10 minutes in the break room, and that strangely thrilling beep of the scanner gun that gave you the impression that you were in charge of something. On other days, it was straight. I entered at 6:45 sharply stomping slush off, and the air outside was thick with the remnants of a snowstorm, with flurries still drifting down like confetti that no one asked for. Up hell screaming toddlers, coupon lunatics demanding manager overrides, and customers who looked right through you like you were just another piece of machinery. That Saturday morning in February was the kind that settled in your bones. As I walked past a group of customers swarming the entrance like it was Black Friday again, I pulled down my hood and wore my boots. "Good morning, Isa," said Dean, our store manager, who was parked next to the security monitors, sipping his customary black coffee. "Morning," I muttered, shrugging off my coat. "Why are they already out there?" "We don't open for business on that day," he grinned and said. "It seems like there is desperation and love in the air this Valentine's Day weekend," he added. "An additional 15 diamond earrings are instant savings of 20% off. The jewelry always attracted a particular type of customer, the ones who stared too, so I laughed, but it felt forced. When I scanned my badge at the back clock, I tried to get rid of the creeping feeling on my shoulders. 5 years ago, I was engaged, completing my master's degree in education, and organizing a late spring wedding with my college sweetheart Riley up in the Poconos. One Tuesday afternoon, I returned home early and discovered him on our couch with my eye dropped. My degree, cancelled the wedding, moved back in with my mom in West Orange, and started working at Costco to make up for the venue deposit I lost. Since then, I've clawed my way back to something that appeared to be stable but trusting, especially with men. This betrayal from my best friend, a maid of honor, breaks my heart. At 9:15, just after the morning rush, I headed to jewelry. The glass displays were already covered in fingerprints and breath marks from customers pointing and dreaming, and a few of them were already requesting to hold rings that they obviously couldn't afford. Our current bestseller was a $2,000 white gold solitaire with a decent sparkle. I heard from the end of the counter that it was Marie, one of my regulars in her late 60s, always dressed like she stepped out of a 1980s Vogue, complete with a huge fur coat, hoop earrings, a shopping cart full of boxed wine, and peanut butter pretzels. The basic setup was glitzy enough to wow, but not so cheap as to shout "Det Isa." "Do you have any more of those silver tennis bracelets available?" she asked, leaning close. "Let me check the drawers," I said, already scuttling under the counter. The metal and cold storage drawers beneath the display were searched through the inventory boxes until I located the SKU tag. But as I reached for the bracelet box, I heard it. Riley Grant leaned against the glass case as if he owned it, his hair longer now, unkempt and somewhat greasy, and I heard a voice I hadn't heard in almost 4 years, but I recognized like a scar beneath the skin. I turned slowly, and the air felt heavier suddenly, as if the temperature had fallen by 10. He wore a smug half smile that used to melt my stomach, but now it made my stomach turn. He said, "I didn't expect to see you here," as if we were bumping into each other at a coffee shop, harmless than the scene of a crime. I stood up straighter, the bracelet box still in my hand, and the eyes themselves were darker, somehow sharper and more hollow. I fixed the voice clip, and he nodded slowly. "Right time flies when you're rebuilding your life, huh?" He grasped at his breast in mock outrage. "That's all I get after everything. It's been like 3 years for." He grinned as if it was some kind of inside joke when I said, "Well, I'm here to buy an engagement ring. Obviously not for you," he added, "though I always thought you'd look good in white gold." Like an echo, a chill went through me as I looked up at the black dome of the ceiling cameras that stared down from every angle. I couldn't leave without calling attention to myself or running the chance of being asked, "Do you need assistance or not?" His fragrance smelled cheap and fake, nearly hiding something else. I asked in a flat, professional voice, and he moved a bit closer. "Yeah," he replied. "Recommend me something good, she's special." I forced a nod, opening the display case. My hands quivered a little as I pulled out a tray of rings. My skin pricked, and I felt a low hum of dread tighten in my chest. I knew deep down that something wasn't right, not just with the circumstance, but with him as well. "These are our best sellers," I said, spreading out the tray as if I wasn't. "This one costs $1,139 after instant savings, and it's a 1-carat high clarity G in white gold." Riley picked it up and held it up to the light as if he really cared. "It's nice, but it needs to scream commitment." "You know," I muttered something under my breath that was just low enough to avoid being seen by the camera, and then maybe screamed. He smirked and cut sideways at me somewhere else. The same old Issa still had that spark, and before I could respond, Marie returned her cart, which was now even more ridiculously packed. "You're a doll, Issa," I said, smiling at her as if nothing had happened, like my ex-fiancée wasn't standing 3 feet away shopping for another woman. And I boxed when I turned around. Riley was still looking at the ring, but his expression had changed. His smile had vanished, and his eyes had become serious and calculating. "I'll take it," he said. "Okay, I'll ring you up at register for," I replied, keeping everything professional. He nodded, slipping the ring box into his coat pocket. Seeing I assumed that would be the end of it, but when he went, I told Dean that I wasn't theatrical, simply stated who he was, and something in his words made my skin crawl cold confidently, as if he already knew he would. The days passed. Quickly after that same cycle of customer complaints, spilled coffee, and red palace, but I couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right, like I'd missed something. Dean shrugged, saying that as long as he paid and didn't make a scene, we couldn't do much. When an elderly woman flagged me down at the entrance, she handed me a black ring box that was identical in style and brand to what we had in the jewelry section. I flipped it open, and to my dismay, I discovered that it was a cheap knockoff made of glassy plastic that looked like the kind of ring you win in a vending machine rather than buy at Costco. I hurried to the back and quickly checked the inventory, finding one of the $2,000 when the diamond solitaires were gone. I looked at the purchase logs and saw that Riley's name was the last one associated with that SKU. I called Dean over and we watched the security footage together. And there, at the jewelry counter, immediately after I assisted Marie, Riley palmed the real diamond ring and, without my knowledge, slipped a fake one into the box and practiced like he had done. I hadn't seen anything before, and the cameras weren't really sufficient for prosecution on their own. The Dean called the police, and about half an hour later, Kinley showed up with a notepad. "Do you know this man personally?" she asked. "Yeah, we were engaged a few years ago." I paused, and she nodded as if to clarify. I knew it wasn't that night, and my car alarm went off twice in the Costco parking lot. Nothing was broken or stolen, but there was something left. A ring box neatly placed on the windshield with a folded note inside. "We'll check the address. On file." It might be Beer's remorse gone sideways. When I walked in on Thursday, Dean grabbed me aside and returned the ring, saying he had dropped it off. "You looked nice down there, but my whole body went cold, and I didn't sleep. Instead, I was whirling. Riley hadn't just stolen a ring. He was playing a game with me while I watched, and no one appeared to be taking it seriously. I stayed late for closing that night and was replenishing bulk packs of vitamins when I heard footsteps steadily behind me. Overnight said it wasn't the right one, so I checked the returned box and found the ring with the real diamond. This meant the switch with the fake had been made after the sale, meaning he still had access to the store. When I felt a warm breath near my ear and a whisper that wasn't a whisper saying "miss me," I screamed and spun around, but no one was there. Secure. On Friday, Valentine's Day, the Dean offered to let me have the day off. I should have accepted, but I was upset and wanted to finish the shift and prove something to myself. At 7:22 p.m., Riley returned without saying anything. He approached the bar without a sneer or charm, just something wild in his eyes. "Why'd you call the cops?" he questioned in a low voice. We could have addressed this like adults. My jaw hardened, and I left, thinking, "You're lucky I didn't do worse." He hissed customers, and they began to back off. One woman pulled her child behind her. "I came here to get closure," Riley said. But now he reached into his coat and said, "Maybe even a second chance." Security quickly moved in. "But officer, I moved to a different Costco in a different city 2 weeks after Kenley was arrested for theft, stalking, and attempted kidnapping. He was already stationed in electronics waiting when she tackled him before he could reach her." Inside his coat were 3 fake rings, a set of zip ties, and a printed photo of me from Facebook. Leans in a bit too closely. "I still worrying about Riley and the ring he never intended to buy. And how many people visit Costco to have access to individuals like me, other than for the deals? I never thought anything really spooky could happen at a Costco, since I thought it was supposed to be a safe and boring place. Fear didn't belong in a place like that, where people hoarded toilet paper in bulk, grabbed rotisserie chickens, and grazed through free samples like cattle in a supermarket pasture. However, I now realize that it was a Thursday evening in early March, and it was just cold enough that your breath fogged in the air, but not cold enough to warrant a coat. I had stayed late at work trying to catch up on emails, and Michelle texted me at around 6 o'clock asking if I could stop by Costco on my way home to pick up some chili powder and ground beef taco seasoning. She wrote that she was working another long shift at the hospital, and that she was too tired to prepare dinner. So I nearly said no because my legs hurt and my head felt full of static. The Eastbrook Parkway Costco was always a zoo at this time, but I reasoned that if I moved quickly, I could leave in 15 or 20 minutes, and maybe even get a 150 hot dog before I left. The parking lot was crowded, but not unruly. You had to park close to the cart returns inside, where the place buzzed faintly under the sun. In an attempt to be efficient, I swerved past the migraine-inducing fluorescent lights, grabbed a cart, and pushed through the entrance past greeters who didn't even look up from their scanners. The shoppers moved like ghosts, slow, tired, and dead-eyed, pushing carts full of enough groceries to feed a bunker for a month. All that was left was meat, taco, seasoning check, and I headed to row 23 of the spice aisle, which was tucked away between the never-ending towers of bulk pasta and industrial bags of baking flour. It stretched high and long like a cathedral of flavor, but no matter how I looked, I couldn't find any chili powder. I saw cayenne, cumin, turmeric, paprika, and even strange items like fennel and cloves. I scowled, thinking perhaps I'd missed it, so I double-checked and, of course, I muttered sharply that I should have ordered it online like a rational person. I looked around, expecting to see a Costco employee in red or blue, but all I saw was an elderly man with a white beard carrying a dolly full of cooking oil boxes, who was obviously a vendor. Helpful. I was about to give up when I heard a voice behind me asking for something spicy. It was low, smooth, and far too near my ear. I jumped, and my body automatically twisted, pulling the cart behind me. A tall man in his mid-30s or early 40s, with dark eyes, tan skin, and those deep-set laugh lines either meant he wore a red Costco vest, but there was something strange about it. It was faded and old, as if it had been washed too many times, and the patch on his chest was crooked and missing its name tag. Yeah, I said, taking a half step backwards, and he smiled too much for the wrong reasons. "Oh, chili powder," he added, stretching out the syllables. That one's tricky likes to hide behind the cumin, sometimes even under the oregano if it's feeling sneaky. His teeth were fine, but his smile was too wide and stretched out like a mask trying too hard to look kind. He turned toward the shelves without responding, and he began moving jars around while muttering spice names under his breath like he was reciting a spell without reading labels. There was a strange rhythm to it. Coriander, turmeric, smoked paprika. Not today. Not you, he said, still facing the wall. I half laughed, trying to be courteous. I hesitated and said, "You're cooking for someone special." I kept my tone, casual, and said, "She likes spicy food." He gave me a sharp little laugh and said, "Spicy women deserve spicy men." I didn't know how to respond, so I just stood there and watched as his hands moved from jar to jar until he turned and held out something. "Here we go, ground chili." My gut knotted as I grabbed for it, but he held it in the air like it was bait and said, "Wait, before you go, can I ask you something personal? Powder is the best we have. Thanks, dude. Appreciate it. If your wife ever wants to try something new," he said, lowering his voice, "have you ever considered adding a third chef to the kitchen?" I blinked, thinking I had misheard. "I guess," I said carefully, and he leaned into close again. I could smell something odd on him, like something metallic and sweet old pennies and rotting oranges. He winked and said, "I don't just spice food, I spice life." I stared at him, my throat dry. "Are you serious?" "I always am," he said, smiling again. "I cook, I clean, I satisfy all flavors." "Okay, I'm good," I muttered, backing away. "Thanks for the help, but that's all." He cocked his head like an inquisitive dog, saying, "Come on, don't be a baby." "I bet she'd love my kielbasa." I tightened my jaw and mumbled to myself, "What's your name?" "I'm reporting you," instead of recoiling. He raised his arms like a midway. Through the introduction, the circus performer said, "My name is Calvin, but most people just call me Chef C." That same smile remained on his face as I catered to the brazen. I had lost any sense of humor. I looked around, but the aisle was still essentially deserted. A few families were too far away to realize what was going on, so I gripped the chili powder tighter and moved away. "You sure?" he asked loudly. "I haven't even shown you my secret ingredient yet." He yelled behind me, "Suit yourself, but don't say I didn't give you a taste of something unforgettable." That was it. I turned abruptly and left, ignoring the shivering sensation that was running up my spine. I accelerated, pushing the cart toward the front of the store with unsteady hands, my heart racing as if I had just run a mile. I don't get scared often, but that guy wasn't just creepy, he was mistaken. There was something genuinely strange about him, like as I left my cart at the self-checkout and flagged down a young employee, maybe 19 years old, with a nervous smile and a name tag that read Chris. "Hey," I said quietly, leaning in, "there's a guy back in the spice aisle with a red vest that says his name's Calvin, or Chef C or something." Skin was stretched over the idea of a person who wasn't an actual one. He said some twisted up stuff sexually disgusting, like really scary. "You might want to check it out." His brows were wrinkled. "Calvin, are you sure that's what he said?" Chris bent his head and asked, "What about him?" Chris responded, "We don't have a Calvin on staff," and he looked over his shoulder. My chest constricted, but he was wearing an old, faded red vest without a name tag. Chris didn't think twice, though, and he took out a walkie-talkie and said, "Maybe this is a middle-aged male impersonator." I paid for my belongings, but I couldn't help but linger close to the exit because I was curious and uneasy about the whole thing. It felt like I had just stepped out of a horror movie before the last act. Two employees showed up a few minutes later, one of them wearing a manager badge, and they both went toward the spice aisle while chatting rapidly into earpieces when there was a scream. Everyone around me stopped in mid-step when someone cried, "He's got a bomb." The store became silent for a half second, followed by a beat of paralyzed panic, and then anarchy. It wasn't hysterical, but it was crisp enough to cut through the background talk. A mother grabbed her child and fled from the produce section. Someone screamed, and a watermelon exploded on the tile floor. Shoppers rushed and pushed abandoned carts in the middle of the aisle. The alarms hadn't even gone off yet, and we didn't need them. I can hardly recall how I got outside. It was like being carried away by the moment. One minute I was looking toward aisle 23. We stood in silence, huddled in clusters, watching through the enormous glass doors as figures moved frantically inside while sirens wailed in the distance. As we got closer, a couple of squad cars, an ambulance, and a bomb squad van, all matte, black and menacing, pulled up right near the entrance. I was in the parking lot, with the cold air stinging my cheeks and the pale orange glow of the streetlights. Chris, the young employee, was a few feet away. He appeared pale, with his hands stuffed deep into his vest pockets. Was it him? I said softly, and Chris nodded. Yes. I stood off to the side, arms pulled tightly across my chest, and my heart thumping so loudly that it reverberated in my ears. They don't believe it's true, Chris continued, but they're not taking any chances. We waited 3 hours in the cold before the cops made a statement. He claimed to have a bomb in an envelope and threatened the manager that if anyone touched him, he would blow the place up. They arrested him but did not release his belongings. The envelope was empty except for a folded takeout menu from an off-brand Chinese restaurant. There were no wires, triggers, or explosives, but it didn't matter because he didn't work there. He had slipped in wearing a vest from an unknown source that blended in like static on a TV screen. According to the name, the investigation was still going on, and it seemed like they were investigating similar incidents in other states. Over the course of the following few weeks, local reports began to surface about a man in a red vest who was always smiling, carrying an envelope, and making strange sexual remarks and disturbing jokes in 3 different states in the same mo. Not because I fear bombs or creeps in red vests, but because I've realized that true horror doesn't always lurk in the shadows or in the shadowed corners of old houses. I haven't returned to Costco since. Sometimes it waits in aisle 23 between the come-in and the cayenne, grinning as if it already knows your name. There was something strangely soothing about the tall shelves of bulk cereal and cleaning supplies, the soft rumble of carts on polished floors, and the low chatter of people lost in their own routines. I had moved to this new city about 8 months ago for a marketing job, and I was still getting used to my new apartment. I used to think of Costco as my little sanctuary, not in a very dramatic way, just familiar, predictable, and safe. Since I didn't really know anyone here, Tuesday nights at Costco became a strange ritual for me. I would always be by myself around 7:15 p.m., right after the dinner crowd had dispersed, and I would flash my membership card at the door, nod to the greeter, and go about your business as if it were clockwork. Aisle 7 for snacks, aisle 10 for paper goods, aisle 23 for frozen goods, and aisle 25 for drinks. Every time, I didn't have to think, my feet just went. I think I enjoyed it that way because it made the quiet in my apartment feel lighter afterward. But one night in late February, that routine ceased to feel comforting. It had been a typical Tuesday. The office was quiet. I ate leftover lunch. The sky was a fake grey that made it look like someone had desaturated the world. And it was cold, but not unbearable. I wore my black parka, pulled my hair up in a low bun, and left with a halfway through aisle 7. I was crouching to get a bag of trail mix when something moved, not in the air exactly, but the parking lot was half empty as usual, with only the usual older couples comparing the prices of olive oil and lone guys in hoodies stacking frozen pizzas into their carts. I had a scrawled list in my coat pocket. I got up and looked casually behind me as if I had forgotten something. And that's when I saw him. He was across the aisle, maybe 15 feet away, standing perfectly still. A man who might be older. It's more like that instinctive tickle behind your ear, a prickle like static, the kind of thing your body notices, but your brain doesn't have words for. Tall and gaunt in his late 60s, he had the appearance of someone who had once been larger, but had withered over time. His beard appeared coarse. His hair was uneven and jagged at the ends, as if it had been bowl cut with dull scissors, and his heavy grey coat drooped on his narrow shoulders, sleeves hanging too long over his hands, and wiry like a scouring pat's bristles, but it was his face that truly captured my attention. His pale, sunken cheeks, deep creases around his mouth, and eyes that were too wide to look away from without blinking or making any facial expressions, all while staring at me. I tried not to think too much about it, but I thought maybe he was staring through me. I turned back to the shelf and pretended to examine an enormous almond jar with my hand resting on the cart handle as if nothing were wrong, but my skin itched with the same prickly uneasiness. I told myself not to be dramatic, that maybe he was just tired, or that everyone has a strange guy at the grocery store, but I turned into aisle 10 a little quicker than usual, and it was empty. To get rid of the sensation, I grabbed a pack of paper towels and arranged them in my cart. Then, I heard a faint movement and looked to the end of the aisle, where I saw the same man in the same pose, still staring. He hadn't followed me exactly. Instead, he was on the next aisle, only visible through the metal shelves, but he had somehow moved to remain in line with me. However, his head was angled and focused, and it struck in a different way this time. I've dealt with inebriated men on subways who harass patrons at bars, but this time, the man wasn't approaching. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't even feigning to shop. He was just observing with no response and no intention. I took out my phone and stared at the screen, pretending to scroll, although my hands were a little too still. I didn't want to be that girl who freaks out over nothing, but something felt strange, so I texted my friend Kayla about a guy in Costco, staring at me if I go missing and exacts revenge on me. After a little while, Kayla took a pic for proof. "Do you have pepper spray?" I smiled, but it felt robotic. Then, against my better judgment, I looked back again, and the man was gone. I let out a sharp breath before realizing how tight my chest had gotten. Perhaps he had simply wandered off. It's okay to stare at someone, right? I pushed forward cartwheels and squeaked a little as I made my way to aisle 23 frozen foods, where I grabbed the usual 2 boxes of frozen burritos and a pepperoni pizza. I stood there for a moment, pretending to think about a family-sized lasagna, just long enough to peek over my head. Maybe I was overanalyzing this whole situation. But when I turned into aisle 25, I hadn't even gone more than a few paces when I noticed him standing at the far end of the aisle, still staring at me with the same coat, choppy bowl cut, and dead stare, stuttering. This wasn't a coincidence. 3 distinct aisles were now separated and precisely timed. He wasn't merely shopping or aimlessly wandering. Rather, he was following me, staying out of reach, but constantly present. This wasn't a dream. I wasn't alone, so I tightened my grip on the cart handle and turned it sharply. I took a deep breath and headed for the self-checkout lanes, trying to keep my pace steady and casual. Don't make a scene, don't run, just move. But my hands were shaking, and as I passed aisle 17, I saw a blur of motion to my mouth. I completely dropped the drinks, screwed the bottled water, and had enough at home. I made it to the front of the store, selecting the farthest self-checkout station from the rotisserie chicken section, where the shadows were thicker. My hands fumbled as I scanned each item, the barcode beeping unnaturally loudly in the distance. Left a glimpse of grey disappearing at the far end. My stomach dropped. He was still moving, watching, and following. I didn't care how I looked. I just wanted to get out of there. Then I noticed his reflection in the freezer case's glass door next to the rotisserie chickens. He was standing there with his hands at his sides, and a woman in yoga pants looked at me, likely noticing the tremble in my fingers or the way I kept flicking my eyes toward the front entrance. He didn't have a cart, and he hadn't picked up anything this whole time. I scanned the last box of burritos with a shaky hand, punched the buttons to pay, and yanked my receipt out of the machine. As soon as it printed, I grabbed my bags and headed straight for the exit. The greeter hardly gave me a glance, cart as soon as I flashed the receipt. I didn't even slow down. My legs were already moving quickly. It's odd to enter the chilly Costco parking lot at night, There are too many people and too much space. It feels exposed, but also empty, as if everything is echoing. My car was parked farther out than I remembered, in row D near the back. There were no people behind me, just a couple of families unloading groceries, a group of teenagers pushing each other close to a dented minivan, a woman grunting as she slammed her trunk shut, and a black sedan power walked between rows of quiet SUVs, eyes darting over my shoulder every few seconds. Crept into the row in front of me, and I froze in mid-step. The black sedan slowed down and rolled straight into my path, as if it had been waiting for me. My damn car, was only about 20 feet behind it. I gripped my keys more tightly, my heart pounding, and the back door opened, revealing the same man with the heavy ball cut. I saw the driver, a new man in his early 30s with a clean cut, and he looked at me calmly and emptily, as if he hadn't even noticed that I had been called. His grey coat eyes were stretched open, glassy and unnatural, like a ventriloquist's dummy had just been yanked to life. He didn't say anything, just stared motionless, as if I had been called by mistake, and he was realizing it too late. When I saw someone simply marking off a box, my legs went to stone, and my thoughts cried out, "Run!" But I was immobile because the man in the back started to step out, breaking something. I turned and raced full pace, half pushing the cart. Prior to throwing it away entirely, I let it crash into the curb with a loud, raw scream that tore from my chest heads. My boots thumped against the pavement, and my breath was already burning in my throat as I heard heavy footsteps approaching. From behind, a horn blared somewhere behind me, and I felt a palm scrape the back of my coat. My fingers curled almost to grab, and I twisted, yanked forward, and kicked wildly behind me. Perhaps I cried again, "Help me," when someone yelled and another cart fell to the ground. I was able to get the space I needed. The man behind me backed off just enough, and I ran again, my legs wobbling and my lungs screaming. To rows over, I noticed an older man inside an idling silver pickup truck. I didn't have time to think before I ran straight for it. The man inside opened the door and stepped out, confused but alert. "Hey, are you okay?" They tried to grab me, and I gasped, almost falling at his feet. He followed me, and I pointed toward the black sedan that was now screeching out of the locked tires, squealing so hard that I was having trouble breathing. The man saw that another customer in a hoodie was already on the phone with 911. The Costco greeter jogged over, and two more staff members hurried outside after him. But it was too late. The sedan had vanished, leaving no license plate or trail, and I fell to the pavement, my knees scraping the asphalt. The police arrived within 5 minutes, and I gave my statement with trembling hands and my phone clutched to my ear as Kayla tried to calm me down from the panic. The officers were kind and focused, asking about every detail while staring at the car, the man's face, the driver, and the store manager. My coat was torn, and my purse was gone. They must have grabbed it. In the chaos, I instantly pulled footage when I noticed it was being watched from several aisles. The grey-coated man was standing motionless, never shopping, and just waiting. It turned out that I wasn't the only one. He had been following two other women that same evening, quite precisely, but none of them noticed him the way I did. And 3 days later, the black 3 women's handbags, duct tape zip ties, a burner phone, and a towel hiding a license plate were discovered inside an abandoned sedan in a downtown underground parking garage. The car was linked to David Lawn, a notorious criminal with a sealed record, who brought himself in and claimed nothing was missing. They caught him a day later attempting to board a Greyhound in Kentucky. They had been pursuing women who were shopping alone, watching for the precise moment when no one would notice them disappear. It has been 6 months since then, and I still shop at Costco, but not that one, never that one. I regret the older man who stared at me like I was a picture he had memorized. It was his uncle. Now that I know evil doesn't always lurk in the shadows, Sometimes it waits in aisle 7, wearing a dead stare and a coat that hangs like a shroud. And sometimes the only thing standing between you and the black sedan, Kayla, and I stay together, even if it means waiting in line longer. We park close to lights and carry pepper spray, and we no longer laugh off the strange feelings. I'd never been inside a Costco before that night. It wasn't a moral statement or anything. I just didn't see the point. I live alone, have no kids, no roommates, and I'm not the kind to buy things. With no plates is that weird little chill at the back of your neck. Pay attention to it. It might just save your life. I heard Jenny and Marcus discussing how much they save by buying in bulk earlier that week at work. Jenny even pulled up her phone and showed me a deal, a 30-day free trial membership with no strings attached. She said, "You don't even have to talk to anyone, sign up online. Use the barcode at the door, boom." In that, I decided to check it out on Friday night, since it was Wednesday. I work the second shift at a logistics company, which isn't particularly fancy, but I basically handle order entries and I rate customers from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. It covers the bills, and I don't detest the hours, but Friday had been a disaster, due to irate customers and system issues. I needed a reset by the time I clocked out, so I reasoned that it would be almost therapeutic to wander a large store in near silence. The Costco was located in a commercial strip of a town called Spring Hollow, which is quiet and mostly forgettable. It was located next to a Home Goods, a Planet Fitness, and one of I pulled into the parking lot at around 9:30, and they closed. At 10 o'clock, the place was huge and mostly deserted at that time, with a few cars gathered near the entrance. Those big box pet stores weren't a bad area per se, just off after dark, deserted, artificially lit, and too quiet like a movie set after everyone has gone home. I left my car somewhere in the middle, close to the building's sidewall, because there were some employee cars toward the back, and I didn't want to be the guy parked right in front of them for no reason. Some of the overhead lights flickered languidly, pulsing in that slow, almost natural way that seeps under your skin. The air inside hit me cold, and the place was crammed with tall, cavernous shelves. At 9:55, a voice crackled over the loudspeakers. "Costa will be closing in 5 minutes. Please proceed to the front registers." I wandered around, not really shopping, but more like browsing aimlessly, picking up a giant tub of almonds, throwing some towels into the cart, and having 3 acts of thermal shirts that I didn't need. I walked up and checked out without any problems. The cashier, a heavy-set man with receding hair and tired eyes, surveyed my belongings, smiled weakly, and inquired, "All right?" I nodded, "Yeah, just taking in the surroundings." He gave me a hazy acknowledgement, no small talk, and I liked that. By 10:05, I was out the door, and the parking lot was strangely deserted, save for a few carts stuck by the cart corral. The lights from Planet Fitness were still shining in the distance, but no one was there, so I started to head for my car. A black sedan sped over the curb separating the Costco lot from the pet supply store, and I froze as it didn't roll over gently. Instead, it sent tires bouncing rough over the grass, headlights jerking wildly before leveling out. And then I heard its screeching tires, not from the road behind me. I'd already got my keys in my hand when it happened. I watched as it crept down the row where my car was, my pulse ticking louder in my ears as it coasted past to empty spaces before stopping not in a space, not at an intersection with a strange controlled urgency. It was headed straight for me, my body locked up, every nerve on edge. I was stuck in no man's land, too far from the store to run back, too far from my car to jump in and lock the doors before they could reach me. It seemed to be trying to park, but the engine stopped, but it was still running, and it sat there idling about 10 feet behind my car. A rush of ideas came flooding in. Perhaps they were waiting for someone. Perhaps they were simply checking their GPS. Perhaps they got lost. But nothing about their parking or their lingering seemed out of the ordinary. I turned slowly and casually, as if I had forgotten something, and began to move back toward the cart return. Perhaps I would even double back into the store, But then I heard the engine scream to life, veered sharply, tore off tires, screeched again, and vanished around the side of the building. It then disappeared around the back of the Planet Fitness building and down the far end of the lot. I waited another beat before briskly walking to my car, my fingers shaking a little as I found my keys, locked the doors, and began the engine. While the dash lights were blinking on, I noticed that the same car's headlights were approaching quickly from the far end of the lot. Without hesitation, it returned to the row where I was parked, and my chest constricted. No, what the hell? It pulled into the space right next to mine. I barely had time to react when the passenger door opened quickly and the man emerged. I saw a glimpse of him in a tall hoodie and dark pants, and I couldn't make out what glinted in his right hand. He headed straight for my driver's side door, and I slammed the lock button just as his hand touched the handle. He yanked nothing, then leaned. There was no car ahead of me, so I threw the car into drive with trembling hands and sped straight ahead, barely avoiding a cart return. I didn't even look back when I got to the road. When I checked my mirrors, the car had turned back toward the lot, not following me. I didn't go home. I immediately drove through random neighborhoods for 30 minutes to see if anyone was following me, but no one was 4 weeks after I repeatedly played it back. I told a few people, including my sister and friend Tara, and they all said the same thing. Good thing you trusted your gut, and it was. But that wasn't the part that bothered me. Couldn't stop thinking about how quickly everything happened and how arbitrary it felt. I hadn't told anyone I was going to Costco that night, and I hadn't even made up my mind until the last minute. I hadn't posted on social media or used location, tags, and during the trial membership, I hadn't even used my real name. Instead, I'd used my middle name and the burner email that I use for coupons in my dreams. The night played repeatedly. Sometimes I wasn't quick enough, sometimes the door didn't lock in time, and sometimes there were multiple guys. There was no way that someone could have planned it. So was it just chance? Or was someone watching the lot, and was he looking for any women leaving alone? I never returned to that Costco, and the trial was never renewed. 3 months later, I was browsing Facebook when I came across a local post shared by a member of a crime watch group. It told me that a woman had been followed in the Target parking lot in the same area at the same time of night, and she had parked halfway like me. When she got into her car, a dark sedan pulled up behind her and drove away. The same sedan then came back and parked next to her, and a man got out and tried to open her door. She locked it and drove away, but the pattern was the same. The comments on the post were full of similar stories, variations on different nights, the same fear. No license plates, no clear footage, and sometimes I still think about it. I should have paid attention to the feeling that began in my chest like a warning bell the moment I saw him. That low, uneasy thrum in my ribs that whispered, "Something's wrong." The flash of his face through the window, the glint of something in his hand, the way he didn't hesitate like he'd done it before, and perhaps just one of those other women didn't get away as cleanly. I was unable to explain why I felt that way because nothing overt had occurred, but I chose to dismiss it and blamed it on nervousness or paranoia. That choice cost me more than just a few $100s I had gathered together. It cost me something more profound and difficult to quantify. It began 2 months ago. I had been saving for a new TV for almost a year, working late shifts at the diner, refusing takeout, and selling my dusty old college textbooks online. After almost 10 years, my old 42-inch TV finally died with a hiss and a screen full of static. I didn't need anything fancy, just something large enough to fill the empty wall in my shoebox-sized apartment, and dependable Costco had what I needed. A weekend sale on a 65-inch Samsung, which isn't the newest model, but is still sturdy, clean, picture perfect, sound good, and has a respectable refresh rate. I spent the entire day checking their website to make sure it was still available at the Breerfield Road location, which has grown to be a familiar place for me over the years. sandwich it between a huge Lowe's and a mostly deserted strip mall, with an abandoned Payless that it was a Sunday night, the kind when the rain doesn't fall heavily and just clings to everything, so I always felt somewhat safe at Costco. I knew the layout, which registers move the fastest, and I even recognized a few of the employees. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, my hoodie was already soaked, and it was empty, not completely deserted, but only a few people were there. There were a lot of cars scattered around the entrance, which should have been my first clue. Since the store closed at 9 o'clock, I reasoned that I would have plenty of time to grab the TV and head out. Cheryl was working the entrance as usual. She was an older woman with silver braids and a friendly voice, and we had previously struck up a conversation about the weather or how long her shift was. "You're cutting it close tonight," she said with a weary smile as I flashed my card. "Just picking something up real quick," I replied, wiping the rain from my brow. I grabbed a regular cart tire that squeaked slightly on the wet floor and headed straight for the electronics section. The store was quieter than I had ever heard it, with no music playing, just the faint sound of a register and the distant beep of a somewhere near the canned goods. I heard a couple fighting in whispers. I quickly located the TV, which was boxed, tightly wrapped in plastic, and had a $479 9 sale tag taped on top. I stood there for a moment admiring it, then took out my phone and double-checked the model number against the one I had saved too easily. Thinking of course the standard. By the time I got back to the front, I saw that Cheryl was gone, and in her place was a teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, bent over his phone behind the podium. The card I had grabbed was much too small for the TV's enormous box, so I sighed and left it parked next to the display before heading back toward the front to get one of those large flatbed carts they keep near the entrance. Even look-uppers. I grab a flatbed cart, the metal clattering as I pull it free. I immediately return to electronics and wrestle the heavy TV box onto the cart, which was heavier than it looked. I grunted as I lifted, trying not to drop it or pull anything in my back, and once it was secure, I began wheeling it toward checkout. I told him, still gasping for air, "Someone's upgrading tonight," and he smiled as he scanned the barcode. "Been saving 4 months," I said, and he nodded. "You're going to need help loading it into your car." "Nah, I think I've got it." "I appreciate it." Even though you parked close, Eric was on register. He was a middle-aged man who was always happy and graying at the temples. "I think I'll handle it." Road D. He gave me the receipt while still grinning, and I said, "Don't throw your back out. That's a nice TV." I laughed politely, pushed the cart toward the exit, and noticed how quiet it had become outside. The sky was dark grey and low. I stopped just outside to scan the parking lot, which was nearly black, with puddles and streetlights creating shaky, distorted reflections in the water. It took a moment, but I saw my car near one of the cart returns, in Road D, and I was about to push when he seemed to have just stepped out of the concrete. He emerged from the side near a concrete pillar, or perhaps he had been standing just out of my line of sight the entire time. He was possibly 510 give or take, thin and wiry, and he wore a red raincoat with the hood pulled low over his busket. His features included eyes that seemed to flick over every part of me at once, sharp cheekbones that resembled blades, jeans that clung weightily to his legs that were soaked halfway up from the rain, and sneakers that made at every step is damp and squishy. "Do you need assistance?" he asked, casual, as if we knew each other. I instinctively shook my head. "I'm good, thanks." He grinned and said, "Not it strangely smooth and warm without being forced." He answered in a cheerful voice, "No worries," adding that it's store policy for me to assist customers in loading large items. He pulled a lanyard out from beneath. I couldn't see anything on his coat, no name, no logo, just condensation because the plastic badge holder was fogged up from the rain. I looked at the box for a moment, then turned back to him. "I can handle it. It's not far." He laughed softly, as if I were a child being stubborn. "But yes, store rules state that if you throw your back out, you get sued. It takes 2 seconds to toss your car in. I should have walked, asked to talk to a manager, or looked for a real employee. I should have seen that there was no name tag, Costco jacket, or gloves, but I was completely soaked and my arms hurt from lifting that fucking box. And I had the thought, what kind of person offers to help? They're not legit. I groaned and sighed, all right, I'll be right here. I'll go pull around. He gave me the thumbs up and moved back under the overhang to avoid the rain. I hurried to get to my car, while attempting not to. My fingers were numb as I reached into my pocket for my keys, and when I unlocked the car, it beeped. I got inside, turned the engine over, and turned on the wipers as I pulled into the fire lane close to the store's entrance. I looked in the direction where I'd left the guy in the cart, but my stomach turned. I parked halfway in the red zone, jumped out, and looked around, but there was no sign of the flatbed or the man in the red. He was pushing my TV across the slippery pavement as I stepped out into the rain and turned in a slow circle, possibly because he had wheeled it somewhere under cover. He was going straight for a beat-up black Dodge Ram, and another man was standing by the open tailgate. As I started toward them, they accelerated, not running, but quick, urgent coordination, and the man in red swung open the truck's tailgate. The two of them heaved the huge box inside, as if they had done it 100 times before. "Hey," I yelled, my voice cracking with panic. He was older and wearing a grey hoodie and jeans. I yelled again, louder this time, but they didn't stop them. The man in the grey hoodie leapt behind the wheel, and the man in the red raincoat darted around to the passenger side. The truck's engine snarled to life as if it had been waiting for this. I began to run, slapping my feet against the wet concrete, my heart already hammering against my ribs, and the truck screeched backward out. I thought they might panic and abandon the TV and run for cover, but the truck didn't slow down and sped up straight at me. I leapt to the side, slipping in a puddle. My knee slammed into the ground, and I skidded awkwardly before rolling behind the metal cart of the room, barely missing a lamppost, then swung hard toward the exit, meaning it had to pass right by me for a second. When I got back, my jeans were soaked, my palms were scraped raw, and I swear I felt the wind as the truck swerved, its wheels jerking sharply in my direction. I'm sure he tried to hit me because of the way the tires screeched and the sudden veer. If I hadn't moved, I would have been under those wheels. My hand trembled as I sat there on the chilly tarmac, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Suddenly, everything was gone, including the license plate, bumper stickers, dents, and the red raincoat billowing behind him like a taunt. I found Dana, the shift manager, who was young, maybe in her mid-20s, with a tight ponytail and sharp eyes behind smudged glasses. Her face changed the moment I started talking, and she didn't ask me any questions as I forced myself to stand up. The air felt bright and dry, and my shoes squeaked awkwardly on the linoleum. In an attempt to downplay it, she simply nodded, her lips pressed firmly, and led me to the back office, where I sat in a folding chair that creaked beneath me while she called the police. Eric, the cashier, also gave a statement, recalling that I had stated I didn't require assistance, and he claimed to have seen the child near the front entrance using his phone, but nothing else out of the ordinary. Dana took the security footage, but the outside cameras were partially blinded by the cops were decent, if not overly hopeful, about it. "Quick hit," one of them said, writing in a small notebook. "They know what they're doing, no plates, no ID. In and out in less than 2 minutes. He'd probably been scoping the lot all evening. The rain showed me leaving with the cart, but after that, there were shadows and blurs and nothing useful." He said it was like this kind of thing happened all the time, and maybe it did. I went home with her. I didn't sleep that night or eat the following morning 4 weeks afterward because of my bruised hip, torn jeans, and the sickening feeling that I had been hunted, not mugged, not randomly robbed, but hunted. Every flash of red in a crowd made my stomach turn, so I started parking directly in front of store entrances, even if it meant going around the lot 5 times. Obsessive about looking at employee badges, lanyards, and assistants, I didn't care if they were carrying a clipboard or wearing a name tag. I continued to ask questions, search for Cheryl, and eventually, no more flatbeds, no more carts, and I got another TV that was smaller and less ostentatious. I never returned to that Costco. If you're the guy in the red raincoat and you're reading this, I hope the TV was heavier than it appeared. I hope it broke your shoulder, bent your wrist, cracked your tailgate, and I hope it didn't even work because you didn't just take a box. You took something I can't figure out how to get back. You took away my sense of security in a place I used to trust. If you're reading this, listen to that voice, you know the one. I only worked at Costco for a few months, but I can't forget one shift no matter how many years go by. Every time I drive past the old store on Main Street in Clearfield, Utah, something in my gut knuckles. It's the one that makes your chest tight and whispers something's wrong, even if you can't explain it, especially when it's raining. I was 22 years old, broke, and feeling like a ghost in my own life when I dropped out of college after failing a second semester in a row. I told everyone it was a break. From the outside, it would have looked like any other Costco in America, with rows of parked cars, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and people wheeling out giant carts full of bulk paper towels and rotisserie chickens. However, I knew in my heart that I would never return, so I moved back in with my dad, who lived alone in a one-story house on the outskirts of town. Clearfield was a quiet neighborhood where the only excitement was the smell of hot dogs in the Costco food court or a clearance sale at Target across the street. I applied at Costco on a whim, reasoning that it was preferable to nothing. But after 3 days, the manager, Janet, who had coffee-stained teeth and tired eyes, called me and said they were in dire need of workers. I received the job orientation, which mostly consisted of common sense instructions like smiling, wearing your name tag, and not letting anyone in without a valid membership. I mostly pushed carts and stocked the freezer area, which was freezing in ways that felt unfair, but occasionally it was a bit cold that night in mid-November. The kind of cold where your nose hairs freeze the moment you step outside. I remember it because I could see my breath the entire shift, even inside the store, while I was stuck on entrance duty, standing there like a security scarecrow, checking IDs as people streamed in with dead eyes and overstuffed wallets. It was the height of after-work chaos, with families panicking and shopping for Thanksgiving carts full of turkeys, giant pies, slabs of butter, and enough soda to hydrate a football team. The doors were automatic, but they kept sliding open as everyone entered, letting in winter gusts. I was up front, zipped into my oversized black jacket underneath the red Costco vest, half hiding behind the membership scanner, asking, "Hey, can I see your card?" Most people were like that, in and out without eye contact, so I preferred it that way. I didn't want to be the guy making awkward small talk about the weather or cranberry sauce. I asked a woman that was pushing a cart with her elbow and balancing a screaming toddler on one hip. She flashed her membership card without even looking. When he first entered, I didn't even recognize something wasn't right. He didn't slow down, didn't get his wallet, or even looked at the scanner. Instead, he went right past the cart return with this stern, determined stride, as if he belonged there. I came closer. "Pardon me, sir. Do you have your membership card?" He didn't flinch, didn't glance at me, and continued going as I was. He was tall, pallid, wearing a faded green military-style jacket that was zipped to his neck, dark pants, and these worn-out black boots. Something about a potted plant in his path really got to me, so I took a few quick steps and cut him off just past the entrance by the rotisserie chicken stand. The smell of greasy meat filled the air between us like a wall. "I apologize, but I need to see your membership card immediately." At that point, he stopped. His eyes shimmered this strange silvery grey, and they didn't blink once. He turned his head and stared, and I mean stared. His face didn't twist with frustration or confusion. Instead, it remained blank like a mannequin left out in the cold. His skin appeared pale, but not from the cold. It was almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lighting. He looked down slowly and read my name tag, Aaron, and my chest tightened as he said it almost whisperingly. He was dry and staring as if he had forgotten how to move his eyelids, so I tried to remain professional. "You need a card to shop here," I repeated, pasting on a weak smile. I had never seen this guy before, but when he said my name, it felt personal, as if I was supposed to remember him too. I forced a small laugh. "You know." He had known it for a long time, but hadn't said it aloud for years, as if he was testing it out in his mouth to make sure it still fit. "Card." He remained motionless and simply stared at me, as if I were a puzzle he was trying to solve. It wasn't a hostile or angry look, but damn, it was the kind of look that makes you question everything. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally said in a slow, low voice, "I'm just getting something from the cafe." I hesitant. I pointed to the back of the store and said, "Okay, the food court's right over there." Technically, the cafe didn't require a membership. Anyone could enter through the side entrance and grab a hot dog or a slice of pizza. But no one ever entered through the main warehouse doors just to hit the cafe. It was strange. It was strange. They rotated me to stocking snacks in aisle 5, and later I assisted this frazzled mom who had knocked over a giant display of goldfish crackers, little orange crumbs everywhere, kids screaming. I stood there watching him go, a pit of unsettling in my stomach for the next couple of hours. By 7:30, as usual, the crowd began to thin out by a do, and we were getting ready to close. I was back at the front with Marcos, a man in his mid-40s who had been there for ages and had a laugh that could break even the worst day. He was using one of those retractable belts to tape off the exit line, asking, "You until close?" We both smiled quietly as Marcos asked, tossing me a leftover churro from the cafe. "No, just clocking out once they shut the doors," I said, chewing into the churro and eager to go home. The store was mostly empty now, with only a few last-minute customers rushing toward the registers. My stomach fell when I spotted the man in the green jacket again. He was standing close to the front between the pharmacy counter and the Christmas wrapping paper display, without a cart or any bags, just staring as if he was waiting for something. "What's up, Marcos, that guy?" Marco squinted as he looked up and down at me. "Looks kind of sketchy, no idea where he's been." I muttered softly. "He came in earlier, said he was getting something from the cafe, but he's been here the whole time." I shook my head, assuming he didn't have a card, and that he hadn't purchased anything. I stayed back by the register with my pulse thumping, as Marcos muttered something under his breath and began to approach the man. "You want me to grab a manager?" he muttered, vanishing past the clothing section. Watching every step, the man didn't run, didn't panic, just slowly turned around and walked back into the deeper aisles like he owned every inch of the place. Marcos followed him for a few steps, then shrugged and turned back. "Slippery guy?" Marcos asked, and I nodded in an attempt to calm myself while he went off to find a supervisor. I remained close to the front, feigning to check the receipt printer, but that guy frightened me more than anyone I'd ever encountered in that store, and I'd seen my fair share of them. It wasn't that he was trespassing, rather, it was more like watching someone in a dream where you know you've never met them, but that their smile seems to be concealing something dangerous that you'd prefer to forget. We started closing down last register, shutting off customers who were trickling out. He was crouching low, slipping behind a tall stack of bulk rice bags, his green jacket barely visible in the flickering warehouse lights, and he was hiding, not like ducking to tie a shoe or catch his breath, but curled tight as I was heading back to clock out when I noticed movement between two pallet stacks near aisle 15. Kelly, the closing manager, was seated at the computer counting the remaining till. "Hey, sorry, there's a guy hiding in aisle 15. I murmured in a voice as his body angled as if he was attempting to blend in, as I froze and backed up slowly so as not to make noise. Same one from earlier. He never left Kelly, and his eyes were sharp as he peered up. Hiding? I asked, nodding without a cart or baggage, just that green jacket. She radioed security, saying, "We'll check it out. You can clock out." I asked, "Are you sure I should stay?" And she shook her head firmly. "It's handled, go on." I should have argued, but I didn't because I was exhausted and didn't want to see what they'd find. 2 days later, when I returned home from my Kelly, drew me aside for the next shift and said, "Hey, good call on that guy." She explained what had happened the other night, and I tried to keep it light-hearted. Security discovered him in aisle 15, saying he was just looking around but wouldn't leave. He became aggressive and wanted to walk farther into the store, so they had to contact the police. When they searched him, Kelly lowered her voice and revealed that he had duct tape and a large hunting knife stuffed inside his coat. I felt my heart sink because no ID would explain why he was there, and the police are still trying to figure it out. That night, I hardly slept, and they kept playing back every detail of how he said my name. He spent those many hours inside observing and waiting. But one question kept coming to mind. Why was he waiting for someone? What was he truly wanting? And what would have happened if I hadn't noticed him when I did? He never brought a cart, never grabbed anything, and never attempted to buy anything. I never really thought about the people who shop at Costco because you see so many of them in a day. Parents trying to keep their toddlers from running amok, couples silently arguing over which vitamin brand is better, and older people hoarding every sample if it were a competition. I had been working at the Midtown Costco in Oregon for less than a year when it happened, so my job wasn't particularly glamorous. Carla, my manager, asked if I could take care of it before things got busy because it was way too early, at 9:45 a.m., but I was sent to the back to clean up and restock the overstocked shelf by the automotive section on Tuesday morning because someone from the opening crew had missed it. Usually, I work as a cashier or stock freezer. Just 15 minutes after the store opened, Costco mornings are rather calm, with overhead lights humming softly, aisles that stretch out like deserted highways, and a strange sense of comfort in the repetition box after box, shelf shift wait repeat. I had a cart full of motor oil jugs and windshield wipers that needed to be changed. I didn't notice him at first because he was standing about 10 feet away, like any other customer, waiting for someone or inspecting the batteries behind me. He had an odd pair of jeans, a blue crew neck sweater, a red baseball cap, and low, thick, black-rimmed glasses. He was clean-shaven, average in build, and in his mid-30s or early 40s. He wasn't looking at the shelves or the carts like a normal person, though, and instead he was staring directly at me. This wasn't a casual glance. Rather, it was full-on and blinking eye contact. At first, I assumed he was just dozing off, as this happens frequently in stores, but when I looked up again, he was still watching, completely still, and his eyes didn't flicker with distraction. I tried to sound casual when I asked, "Hey, can I help you find something?" He didn't even flinch when I met them. "Nothing. Register that I spoke." I laughed awkwardly. "And you, good sir, were looking for something specific." But there was nothing there. It was just that dead, immobile stare, and it was unnerving, not frightening, but there was that tight, low hum of wrongness behind your eyes, as if your brains were trying to warn you, but you didn't want to listen. I looked around, but there was nothing else. There were no workers around, just me, and this guy and an aisle full of winter tires and car wax. I gave it 10 more seconds, but he didn't blink, so I turned back to the shelf and concentrated on my work because people always act strangely. Perhaps he was neurodivergent or something, and I didn't want to pass judgment, but even with my back to him, I could feel his eyes drilling. The aisle was empty when I let out a breath without realizing I'd been holding it in, and I muttered, "Okay, before an odd voice in my head said, "Yeah, he didn't move, not a muscle, no footsteps, no cart shuffling, just silence behind me." It felt like forever before I looked back again. I acknowledged that it was scary, but it quickly faded since I had boxes to break down carts to move time to kill. By the time my shift finished at 3 p.m., I had essentially forgotten about the entire incident until I arrived home at 4 p.m. at the flat to myself for the week. While my roommate Erin was away visiting her sister in Eugene, I ordered meals, watched Netflix, and browsed TikTok as normal, and nothing seemed strange until about 1 a.m. Had just finished brushing my teeth, and I was shutting down my laptop when I happened to look out the window of my bedroom, which faces the street. The neighborhood is quiet, with only a sidewalk and a row of street lamps on the second floor, but tonight I noticed someone standing across the street. I could tell it was him even from a distance because he was wearing the same red cap and blue sweater. I froze in a pose, like to an unwanted statue in the drab light of a street lamp. My heart was pounding and fluttering in my chest, as if it were trying to punch its way out. I told myself, maybe, during that bizarre instant when your mind is racing to convince itself that this can't be a coincidence, it's merely a person who resembles him. I leaned closer to the window, squinted, and I ripped the curtains shut so quickly that I almost tore them off the wall when he tilted his head slightly in my direction. What the hell? Without even looking again, I stepped away, turned off my lamp, and knelt by the window, my hands shaking like if I'd been going through my head, wondering how in the world he could have known where I lived. I didn't get much sleep that night, and the following morning I informed Daniel and Steph. Two co-workers were discussing what happened. Steph laughed first. "So that's a little dubious. Are you certain that wasn't just a lookalike?" Daniel added, "I know what I saw people in the city wear red hats and..." I mumbled something more subdued. Then Steph offered to escort me to my car, but neither of them appeared really concerned. After our shift, which was somewhat helpful, nothing happened for the remainder of the day or the following day, so I began to tell myself that perhaps it was just a random guy wearing identical clothes, but I was really paranoid. Then Saturday arrived, and everything went south for Costco's weekend shifts. Are constantly chaotic, with crowded aisles, crowded food courts, and long checkout lines. I was around 1 p.m. I was stationed next to the apparel aisle, stacking sweaters and folding rejected jeans. There was a tap on I turned to look for a customer on my shoulder. "And he was too near now," he said. "Hey, blue sweater, same red cap," grinning as if we were old friends, companions. "Remember me?" he inquired. I blinked hard that felt like it had exploded. "Did you need anything?" "Huh." I stumbled and took a step back. "Have step do. You recall me?" His voice was silky and low as he continued. "You saw me the every other day." I took a deep breath. "If you need assistance with the item, I can get I told the manager, attempting to remain composed, and he gave me a breathy, soft laugh that froze me. "And you didn't tell anyone about it," which put a chill down my spine. I looked about and saw too many people, too loud, and no one was paying attention. I was about to ask you to leave me alone when I said it more firmly, but he merely grinned and replied, "You live in an apartment." I stopped breathing at 206, and time froze, and he simply turned and left, vanishing like a ghost into the crowd. Thank God, my manager didn't take it lightly after I reported it right away. Examined the camera tape, informed the store's security, and was even granted permission to depart early, but they were never able to apprehend him, the building, and by the time anyone looked, he had already left. Without a name or a more specific threat, I submitted a police report that evening, and they stated there wasn't much they could do. The police told me to keep your doors locked, and I said, "Yeah, thanks for the comfort." I didn't return to work for 3 days, during which I met him twice more, once in the parking lot of my apartment building. I was standing beside a street sign, farther down the street from my bedroom window. I drove directly to a friend's house since I was afraid to get out of my car, and I crashed there overnight until the sighting halted weeks ago. There were no more red hats. Additional odd grins. Costco leads me to a new area nearer to the neighborhood management and parents were helpful, but some co-workers weren't. A few people continued to make jokes about my stalker lover, but I am aware of what I witnessed, what I experienced, and each time I pass someone in a warehouse aisle who stays a bit too long close by, I'm still not sure how he found me, and I'm not sure if he'll ever find me again. So I feel that same chill creeping up my spine return, but I do know that he did remember me. Everybody from the night. I thought I was getting better. It had been almost a week since I last saw him. No red cap, no silent staring outside my window, no strange visits at Costco. The police didn't call, and I had convinced myself maybe he had moved on. Maybe the sudden attention scared him off. I even returned to work, trying to pretend I hadn't flinched every time a man in a baseball cap walked past my register. I was assigned to front-end stocking, now safer, closer to managers, more public. That helped for a while. Then I found the note. It was folded in half, tucked neatly under the windshield wiper of my car. I had worked the early shift that day, 7 a.m. to 3, and the parking lot was already packed by the time I came out, dragging my feet under the grey sky. At first I thought it was a flyer, some local gym promo or church bulletin, but when I unfolded it, my mouth went dry. You look sad today. Maybe that's because you're sleeping at someone else's house now. I liked the blue hoodie. Smiley face. I dropped it instantly, as if it had burned me. My hands started shaking so hard I fumbled with my phone trying to take a picture of it before it blew away in the wind. I didn't want to touch it again. Didn't want my fingerprints on it. My entire body went cold. Not just fear violation. How long had he been watching? Did he know I had stayed at Tara's house? Had he followed me there? I reported it. Again, the cops showed up, took a photo, bagged the note, and said they'd follow up. That meant nothing. That night, I didn't go to Tara's. I didn't go home either. I drove aimlessly 4 hours. I stopped at a 24-hour diner at 11:30 p.m., my eyes stinging, my brain trying to convince me I was being dramatic. But then again, dramatic people don't get notes tucked under their wipers from men who know where they sleep. ***, 3 nights later, just after midnight, my apartment lost power, not the building, just my unit. The hallway lights were still on when I opened the door, and I could hear the dull hum of my neighbor's TV through the wall. But my place was dark, quiet, and still. I stood there holding my phone flashlight, frozen in the doorway, not wanting to go in. I hadn't blown a fuse. The breaker wasn't tripped. I hadn't touched a thing. It was like someone had just flipped a switch from outside, from somewhere they shouldn't be able to reach. My first thought wasn't rational. He's inside. I backed out slowly and called the building manager. He didn't answer. Then I called Tara, voice shaking, and she told me to get in my car and go somewhere public. I did. I waited at a gas station for over an hour before finally calling the cops. Again, a different set this time. They came, walked through the unit, and said they saw no sign of forced entry. Could just be faulty wiring, one of them offered. I asked if faulty wiring could shut down just one unit in an otherwise lit building. They didn't answer. When I returned, the lights were back on, nothing missing, nothing out of place, except for one thing. On the kitchen counter, next to the fruit bowl, sat a single Costco churro, still warm. I hadn't bought one in days. I hadn't brought one home, and I sure as hell didn't leave it there. ***, I didn't eat the churro. I didn't touch it. I stood in my own kitchen, staring at the sugar-dusted cow. It had grown there, like it had bloomed in the night from rotten warning. I knew what it was, a message, a call back to that slow, polite voice, and the laughter I'd once dismissed. That night, I drove to my manager's house. I didn't even know why. I just knew I couldn't sleep in that apartment. Not now. Kelly let me in without asking questions. I barely said a word. We sat in her living room in the blue TV glow, both pretending the news was more interesting than what I just told her. But I didn't file a report this time. I didn't tell the police, or the apartment management, or even Tara, because what would I say? That churro on my counter. I didn't buy it. They shut off my power for a few hours and then left a pastry behind. There were no prints, no cameras, no proof. Just a rising certainty that I was being toyed with, and that he was close. Closer than I'd ever let myself believe. A week later, they moved me to the seasonal section near the outdoor displays. Mostly patio furniture and fans nobody was buying in January. The shift was quiet, almost peaceful, until I went to the employee restroom. It was a tiny single stall, one tucked behind the break room beige walls. Flickering light, the sound of distant walkie-talkies crackling from somewhere down the hall. I washed my hands and looked up at the mirror and stopped breathing. Someone had scratched something into the glass, not deep, not obvious, but when the light hit at the right angle, you could see it. My name. Just my name, not carved with rage or carelessness. It was deliberate, careful, scratched at an angle like the person had all the time in the world. Like they knew exactly when someone would see it. I ran my finger across the letters. My name. It hadn't been there the day before. I left the bathroom and told Kelly. She checked it with me, eyes narrowing. She didn't say much, but I could tell she was rattled. She promised to report it, said maintenance would replace the mirror. But as I left that day, I looked across the parking lot and saw a figure standing behind the tree line near the delivery truck stop, far enough that I couldn't see a face, close enough to know it was him. The red cap was gone now. So was the blue sweater, but he didn't move. He just stood there, hands at his sides, watching. And somehow, that was worse, because it meant he had changed clothes, because it meant he wanted me to wonder who he was next.